If you are enjoying the series, please make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and of course share it with a friend or not. If you know anyone with flowers, this is one to share with them. If they like the idea of wildflowers, if they like the environment, this is one to share with them. So make sure to pass it on to your friends and family and everyone else in the world.
So if we have lost massive amounts of biodiversity, it is only a matter of time before, life ends. The bigger you get, the more important that becomes. And again, that's obvious. It kind of looked awful, really sparse, but it looked horrible. And I thought that's pretty much hopeless. But they weren't a big thing, and they were kind of looked on a little bit suspiciously. I think it's fair to say in farming, it's done notoriously badly, actually. And
hello, I'm Hayden Bluefield, and welcome to the jungle. Welcome to this week's episode of Benevolent Business. This week, on the subject of flowers, actually, I'm talking to James Hewetson-Brown, the founder of Wildflower Turf, although it was his father's farm that he took over and has transformed it into Wildflower Turf now. This conversation is really interesting and really a real focus on climate change here in terms of how we can make action and the impacts that flowers can actually have on the environment. This conversation came from a couple of years ago. I went on the Wildflower Turf training course that they run for landscapers and such to really learn more. And as I said in the conversation, like in my head, this was a bit of a let's get people in and make some money here. Whereas I actually realised the value in the course and the amount you learn. I went in a complete novice, not knowing much about wildflowers and thinking, I can lay them. Whereas I walked out having quite a strong knowledge to be able to advise people on exactly how to have them, look after them, and be able to identify the issues and know the solutions in terms of looking after wildflowers. So if you are someone with a patch in your garden that you think wildflowers would be a good idea, definitely give them a check out. Send me some photos because they look really nice. For me personally, I just want to point out it's really exciting. The next couple of episodes, because we're wrapping up to a close of series 2 of the podcast, and the last 2 episodes were a complete different experience in terms of recording, or the last 3 episodes, should I say. So this one we had to do over Zoom purely because I wasn't in a position to get all the way down to North Hampshire, unfortunately. But I'm not even sure I've got the location right. Whereas the last 2 were actually in person, and the last penultimate episode with Keith Mabutt, who's back on the podcast, we filmed outside on a nice field in a college campus. That was an interesting experience, having students walk past. And then the ultimate episode, the last episode with Molly, the founder of Molly Moodle Media. With Molly, the founder of Molly Moodle Media, was actually in a studio where, well, as we mentioned in that up and coming episode, just the experience for your ears, just audio in that room is really surreal and strange. So I'm curious to see the difference, and for you, the listener, the experience you'll have listening to Keith compared to Molly in the coming weeks. So that'll be interesting. But anyway, I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and it's really nice, and it feels like quite an achievement, I will say, for myself to get to the end of recording now for series 2. And all I can say is for series 3, I've got some very exciting things lined up. Great guests, written out myself a list of, I think, something like 30 potential guests that I'm going to reach out to. Some of them I'm definitely going to have no chance of being able to get hold of, but I'm going to give it a go anyway, just for you to see if I can have these wonderful conversations. But otherwise, let's get stuck into this week's conversation with James Hewetson-Brown. Well, James, thank you for coming on Benevolent Business. I appreciate you taking the time.
That's all right. That's a pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Wildflower Turf. So my understanding is, because to give context, Wildflower Turf, I met you when I did the course. So for contractors and people that own grounds maintenance, garden company and such, if you can install the Wildflower Turf, you can go on your course so that you can have the training to get on board with it, which I will admit, my prejudice, I was a bit like, is this a course to just try and get a bit more money out of someone? But then I went on the course and I was like, wow, there's actually so much information and so much value from it. So it was a really good day and gave me so much insight, and I came away with so much education that I've learned a lot from it. So it's a really good day. So there's some feedback for you. But
thank you very much.
In starting a business, my understanding is, if I've done my research right, it was originally a turf business that's come down in your family generations. So was it your father or grandfather or something started it, if I'm right?
Originally, it was a farm. We're farmers. We still are farming. And then, as part of my father's sort of business development, he set up this system that we grow the wildflower turf in. It's a fairly unique system that really he developed, but he developed it for lawn turf, and it's still unique in that it doesn't include any soil. It's unique because he was given an idea which was very much a sort of manual, how to do it manually, and he developed some machinery to grow lawn turf, soilless lawn turf, and that was called Coronet Turf. And it actually, it was a reasonable brand back in its day, but the quality was very good, but we just couldn't make any money at it because it's an expensive way of producing the turf. The quality was exceptional, but as conventional turf got better and better quality, we struggled. So then I was sort of in the business by then, and I just thought, well, I love the idea. This principle just makes so much sense in so many ways. Is there a way we can kind of do something that will just make a better margin? And I tried some wildflowers, and the rest is history with that.
Okay, so how did that conversation go? Like with your idea, going to your dad with it, is that something that he went, "Hi son, that's an amazing idea, let's trial it," or was he kind of like, "Who are you to tell me how to run my business"? What was that conversation like?
Well, that is a very good question, and it goes to the heart of, I think, many families and businesses, but particularly in the farming world, and the whole thing about succession and at what point do you hand over and how is that done? And I think it's fair to say in farming, it's done notoriously badly, actually. And with my father, it was a struggle. But I have to say, he did allow it, and I can touch on what happened. So he was a real perfectionist. His farming processes and everything he did, he was a first generation farmer, so that wasn't a grandfather thing. He kind of flew the nest and was a little bit frowned upon to go farming. He did it very, very well. Perfectionism, as I've found out, isn't the be all and end all, but for him it was, and he built the farming business to a very high standard. And then he came up with this diversification idea, and he did similarly with that. It was all, the quality of the lawn was all about zero weeds, absolute uniformity, top quality, and that required a great deal of sort of input. And him as a perfectionist, that's what he did. So when I came along and said, let's try some wildflowers, which to him as a farmer effectively arable weeds, you can imagine that, yes, his face was a little disbelieving, I suppose. But we had a great advantage, or I had a great advantage, in that I could do it grow the whole thing, as in the way we developed it, very organically. Our timing was, wildflowers were a thing back then, but they weren't a big thing, and they were kind of looked on a little bit suspiciously. We were lucky, or I was lucky, in that after a few years of a bit of trial and error with this, it started to work. And at the same time, the interest in wildflowers started to work. And so we were allowed to grow, and gradually we were growing more and more wildflower turf and less lawn turf. And as far as he was concerned, as I say, initially when I did that very first bit, he looked on aghast, really, because it was everything he was anti. But as things progressed, and the only reason we had to charge more, so it was a much higher return with the wildflowers compared to the lawns. And as things progressed and we were selling more and more wildflower turf, it became, as he did less and I was doing more, I would say, "Oh, we've just had a great order." And his first question was always, "Is it wildflowers or is it lawn turf?" And the fact was, he wanted it to be wildflowers because, out and out, he was a farmer, so we needed to make money. And so that was really how it worked with him. And as we were supplying more and the numbers sort of dictated, he became an absolute convert. And to be honest, as you saw the results, it wasn't just a financial thing. As you saw the alternatives between people who are trying to do this from seed and people who are doing it from turf, and they were sending back their images, they were very pleased, and he could see these were fantastic, places to be, habitats, color. It was a lovely thing. And there's a lot in that, actually, because, if to go into the detail of wildflowers and seeds, seeding, it can work. We definitely don't rule out seeding, as you will have heard on the training. It's a doable thing, but it's just down to speed and reliability, which you can get with the turf. And if you're a landscape professional, that's what you want: speed and reliability. You have much less tolerance of throwing some seed down and waiting the number of years you need. So I didn't mean to get that in as a sort of plug, but it is really how the whole thing has developed. It's been about going with what people want, really, as much as anything, and satisfying customer demand.
Yeah, and I like the story, and it's good to hear that you triumphed over your dad's doubts of its potential. But because one huge thing that I'm going to test my memory now is Wildflower the third largest store of carbon? Is that right?
Well, that is another good question. It is a very good store of carbon. And I think, I don't know about a third, we're trying to get more detail on that. There's lots of sort of desktop studies. It is quite a difficult one to show, but I actually had some people recently from the Centre of Ecology and Hydrology, and they've been doing this work for a long time. And they assured me that wildflower meadows were way better than grasslands. I think, yes, compared to trees, especially if you time it over a time scale, then wildflowers are so quick compared to trees. So they're very good from that point of view. Obviously, if you go to peatland and things like that, there are some really scientific reasons why other habitats like peat are really good, because they're acidic. So as they pull the carbon in the acid lower levels, if you like, it's locked in and stored because of that sort of eutrophication, if that's the word, or acidification. It's kind of stored. So they're very, very good. But wildflowers are very good because they have these deep roots and they're perennial, so they're there year on year. The answer is they are very good, and we need to get that message out, because like all these things, there isn't a silver bullet. I heard this the other day. There isn't going to be no silver bullet, but there's silver buckshot, and every little bit can contribute to the outcome. And wildflowers would be a big bit of buckshot in that armory.
So with growing a business in wildflowers, from when you incepted the idea, you said about obviously there was awareness of wildflowers, and well, from a farmer's perspective, a big no-no with regards to being some kind of wild weed. But in growing the business, growing the awareness, developing this product and then scaling, did you find so you just said before we started about having an interview with Hawk Week, was that something that you found as you were growing organically? It just started coming towards you. People wanted to discover what this product was, wanted to have you featured in some kind of horticultural like writings or blogs, whatever it was? Or did you find this was something that you really had to go out and you had to scream and shout and slam down doors to get the name, get the awareness of wildflower turf and its benefits?
Well, I think it's probably the former. We, as I said at the start, we've been quite lucky our timing has been that as interest in the environment, maybe not specifically wildflowers, but the environment has grown, we have been able to grow with it. But I definitely think we have contributed to that knowledge and that interest. I've thought about this, over the years, and there's an interesting stat out there that has been bandied about by every single report on biodiversity and wildflowers, and that is 97% of wildflower meadows have been lost since the Second World War. And I've thought about that because that was a stat that we saw it was a sort of charity that was looking at grasslands, and they were quite small and they folded for whatever reason after a while, but they had one or two fairly eminent high profile people, and they came up with that stat. Now we locked into that and promoted that stat with all our marketing stuff, and so we didn't come up with it in the first place. I didn't do the research to really study those numbers. It was a stat that we heard and thought that's pretty impactful, and we'll use it. And I think that through our promoting it, that is a stat that's rolled out. So I'm owning up to we didn't come up with it, but at the same time, I definitely think we helped promote it. Without doubt, both go hand in hand. For us to claim that we've raised awareness would be totally wrong, but we have had a big part in promoting it. And at the same time, we're pushing an open door because there's so much interest in this whole arena.
When it comes to scaling from a team perspective, you've got this new innovation, this new product. When it came to building a team, and because when I came for the training day, it's huge scale.
So yeah, 25 people, sort of 26 people on the books here. That's over 3 sites in the country, but predominantly here and growing quickly. 2 years ago, I think we were about 12 or 13. So it's been quite a quick growth recently.
Yeah. So hiring and growing a team in-house with this, as you said, like a new innovation, a new product, How did you find that initial recruitment? Because it's the same thing for landscapers, as you said. There's the conversation that customers like the idea, landscapers like the idea, but then when it actually comes to recruitment, trying to say we want to employ you, we're going to market this as we're a wildflower turf company, we grow wildflower turf. Did you find it challenging to recruit and find team members? Were people kind of like, what's flower turf? Like, what is this kind of thing? So what was it like building a team and getting to a point of 25?
Well, part of it is we've come from agriculture, and a lot of the production side of it, the physical side of it, is very closely linked to agriculture. We're using tractors and forklifts. Quite a lot of agricultural equipment is outside on acres and acres of land. So that drove the production side of things, and still does actually. That in itself is an interesting story, because what you find is we're finding people that come from agriculture who we really like. They have a great skill set, but they're coming to us, and it isn't driving a tractor all day, every day, which tends to be the sort of 17 to 25-year-olds, because they love the kit and they can earn big money, but working sort of 90-hour weeks or over. But as soon as you get past that and you get a family, that ceases to have its attraction. So we're finding people come to us who like the idea of being outside using the equipment, but can have a much more sort of not working at weekends, not 9 to 5 or 7:30 to 4:30. So, they have the links with agriculture, but they have a much more family friendly sort of life. So that covers a bit of the production, and that's how we find we got people. But conversely, there are certain people, a farming fraternity that, rather like my father started with, the idea of growing wildflowers is never going to float their boat. So it's a bit of that, and trying to show them the opportunity, because we're growing numbers. That means getting skilled people, that means finding managers, and that means paying more, and it just means job security and that sort of thing. So we're finding that now it's easier to find people along those lines for the production. And then in the early days with a sort of more marketing and sales, that's, there are plenty of people since we started who have been interested in the environment and love the idea of being involved in that. So that's probably a lot easier. So I think that answers your question. It's been okay. And just now, because things are going well and it's an area that people are interested in, we do find it a bit easier, but that's not to say it's easy. I mean, finding staff is always an issue, and finding people, but we're doing a lot for trying to retain staff and putting in remuneration sort of packages and things, and we're always looking for people. So if anyone's listening and they fancy a job outside.
Keeping on the subject then of, like, as you said, it's got easier, you're doing well, and like picking up salespeople and stuff has been quite easy. As you said, there's the influence there with the environment, and people who are quite passionate there would happily work for a company. So can you pinpoint some times since starting this journey where you've identified the biggest wins, biggest breakthroughs for you, and what some of those personal highlights are?
There are a few that stick in my mind. I suppose, one, the very, very early one, and goes back to the question you asked about my father and all that. I just took 1 square metre of our system, if you like. I put the wildflowers in that, and it sort of grew, but it looked horrible. And I thought, well, that's pretty much hopeless, but I won't totally give up with it. And I put it on a piece of rough area in the farmyard, and didn't really think more of it, but kept half an eye on it, and one day I went back, having not looked at it for a while, and there was this 1 square metre in amongst all the weeds in the yard that was vibrant, full of colour, full of bugs, and it was almost like, I don't know how but it was a bit of a sort of, wow, that is amazing. And that has got to have legs. So that was in the very early days. And from that, because we tried a couple of times and whatever reason it hadn't really worked, this was kind of a last ditch effort, and that worked. So that was one of those moments I think you're talking about. And in the sort of thinking about in a chronological order, another was then the first proper commercial chunk we grew. Similarly, we grew it, and compared to our pristine lawn turf, this bigger chunk, 400 square meters, one of our beds, it kind of looked awful, really sparse, plants dotted about all over the place, but not if you said the lawn turf was 100% cover, this was probably, I don't know, 25, 30% cover. It looked horrible. And again, I thought, well, there's no way we can sell that. But we just built a small reservoir and it had all this bare soil. So I was thinking, well, how do we get rid of this? Well, we'll just plant it around this corner of this reservoir. Again, kept an eye on it. And it very quickly went from this rough looking turf into this colourful, amazing meadow. And I've still got the picture because my boys, I said, this is great. We can get some publicity out of this. And they were, I can't remember, 5 and 6 or something. And I said, come on, we're going to go and take a picture. And I got them up and it's still I'm pretty sure it's in some of our publicity stuff. And I got them to squat down and they squatted in all this colour and it looked great. I said, no, come on, you've got to look interesting. Point at something as if you're sort of interested in a butterfly or something. And the older one pointed and looked pretty angelic. And I got this great picture, which we still use. And now they're, one's just left home with his girlfriend and he's 24 or 5, and the other's a bit, a year or so younger and it's just leaving university. And the point is that moment was lovely when it happened. And actually we had some very interesting sort of comments on that at the time that gave me reassurance that we were, going along the right track. But even now, however many years that is on, it's nearly 20, this patch is totally amazing every year and we do very little to it. And so to have that reassurance is another one. We were very lucky in 2012 with the Olympics. And, we were still relatively early in the whole business then. We were doing quite a lot by then, but we were the only ones doing it. And we got some great contracts from the opening ceremony to the athletes' village to the transformation post-games, as well as quite a few tidy up spaces within the whole Olympic area in London, Greenwich Park for the practice equestrian thing. There was quite a lot of things we got involved with. And we managed to deliver them all and on time. And there were some serious deadlines with that, particularly the opening ceremony, in a very, very difficult year in terms of weather. 2012 was awful as a growing season in the early part of the year. And we got all these things out. And I was hoping to go up to the opening ceremony and we'd had that all in place, but the security and things, it was just chaos in the build up to the whole thing. It really was. Our supply chains it was chaotic, but each time we managed to get over the line. And although I didn't get to go to the opening ceremony, we sat in our kitchen and watched it on telly with a glass of something. And again, that was amongst many in that whole Olympic thing. That was a real memory that I look back on and think, that was incredible. The whole journey with that to get there was amazing, but then the subsequent effects of that, because it really put us on the map and it really meant that, we were to be considered. I think a lot of the people that bought from us for the Olympics thought, God, we're pinning a lot in these guys in the middle of the countryside in Hampshire. They asked us, have we got an organogram for the business? And I didn't even know what it was. They gave us a contract that was 1.5 inches thick, and we'd never signed a contract for growing turf ever. And a lot of it was flying by the seat of our pants, and so were they. But the results were good, and there's still legacy. The athletes' village is still a lot of stuff there. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but it's a big question.
There's some incredible answers there and some great memories, and I think being able to connect and resonate with those stories that you've mentioned, like for you, just hearing those stories, I think to think back, it all started from you having this idea and testing and having this little patch, and you've got those memories back then, and it's turned into being part of the Olympic ceremony in England when it's hosted in London, and you've installed
1 billion or something people watching it. That's another thing. It was amazing to think that.
Yeah, exactly. There's been some incredible things. So while we're on this really high note, to bring it down the opposite, what have been some of the greatest challenges? Because this is something I always enjoy, as dark as the question is, but I enjoy asking business owners the biggest challenges, I think it's where you can learn so much, and it's where you can share the most value with each other. When I've had conversations with other business owners of some of the hardest things they've had to deal with, it can sometimes make you feel a lot better going, oh, thank God I ain't got to deal with that. But a lot of the time, there's a lot to learn in people's mistakes and how they've overcome them. So for you, James, what have been some of the standout moments where, well, you might not have thought everything was going to fall apart and foul, but have you come to a point where you're like, this isn't going to work, it's all falling apart? What have been those standout?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And, as a farmer, my training in farming was reasonable, although I never learned much, but then it isn't that hard, to be honest. There is a well tried and tested methodology for farming. And, I had a good trainer in my father who did it very, very well. But as a farmer, you weren't used to, well, I certainly wasn't. The business was small. It was me and my father and another guy we had on the farm. And he was a very good guy and he's still with us. But it's very much, it's interesting. There's lots of things. But if you think about one of the things that I know now, and I've learned recently and I'm still learning, is that you have to think, as the business gets bigger, you've got to think into the future. And that kind of sounds obvious, but you need to know where you're heading with it. And you need to have a bit of a plan to get there. And it needs to be more than 1 year ahead. And with farming, it's very much 1 year ahead because it's so seasonal. It is totally dependent on the weather and there is a season. So you're very aware of, as a farmer, you're outside, you're very aware of nature and the environment and how that impacts your business. And you worry because a lot of those things you have no control over, particularly the weather. And particularly in case of farming prices, with us, with the turf, we can say this is going to cost you that much and take it or leave it. With the farming, you go cap in hand and say, I've got a ton of wheat here. How much will you give it me for it? And it's a totally different mindset because you haven't got to worry about marketing. So I came from that background. And so the learning has been steep and not without its worries. For sure, because with each expansion of whatever form it is, it's a big commitment in cash. There's a big commitment to the people. You've talked about them, and I would like to think that we really do try hard for our employees. You obviously have to speak to them to see if they agree, but I'd like to think I do sort of feel for them a lot, especially, we've got a lot of very good employees, and when you've got some people, it's good people, you kind of really value them. So that's stressful, having the people, hoping that they're happy, hoping that they see a future, and hoping that we can get them. And what if one leaves for whatever reason? So that is the bigger you get, the more important that becomes. And again, that's obvious. I do find now, having been farming, I'm very much more think about people and then whether something's getting sown in the right date. So those are quite big things, and I think that learning curve has been quite difficult for me, but I have had help. So and without that help, it would have been difficult. And we got a pretty tight team in that sort of top end, because my wife is financial director, and so we kind of work quite well together. She might disagree at times, but on the whole, it's all good. So I've had a bit of help. So yeah, you'll have to ask the question again if you want more answers on that. But that's what I've thought about for the moment, and I think there's lots that go into all that. I mean, yeah. So you ask it again in the same way, and I'll think of another thing.
Well, I want to add on from what you said there, like with your team and such. That's one thing that I took away from that day as well. Enough, like separate from the training, one thing that just resonated with me was the fact that the people that were giving the training clearly cared a lot and had a lot. They had this personal investment in the company. They wanted to see it do well, and they were vested in it. That really came across. So you've really got some great people working for you there, and obviously do a lot to give off a great impression of the company, especially as they were presenting throughout the day. One thing I want to ask about, though, is you said about your wife as the financial director. So I've had conversations with people over the years in terms of whether going solo, having co-founders or co-partners. And I always remember this piece of advice that someone gave me, and they said, never, ever work with friends or family. Never go into business with friends or family. It only ends badly. But then I've spoken to successful business owners like yourself and people that have built companies worth in excess of 50 million. And same thing, their wife is one of the partners and they work really well together. So for you, how, and I suppose if anyone's listening that is in a marriage or long-term relationship and they're going down, my last podcast guest I had a conversation with, is just literally starting a business with their partner. So what advice have you got there? Because I can imagine it being quite a tense environment and tense relationship at times when business is involved, let alone normal life.
Yes. It is. And I suppose you mentioned the investment of the staff. Um, that is something that we're very lucky with. And I suppose it's just the whole thing is wrapped up in a way, whether it's the staff, you just kind of want to do your best by people. And I suppose, and I think it would be fair to say if my wife was here, she would say she gets the hardest bit of all of that, because she's the one that I can really tell. I can really go in and say it like I see it, so she will get, and if it's been stressful, she's the one that has to deal with that. Yeah, I mean, I can see both sides of it. I guess I'm just lucky that Claire's good at doing that, and she's good at helping to run the business. And to be honest, I see it very much as a team. It's a difficult question to answer, but fortunately it works. So going into that, I'm afraid I'm not really much use at giving advice of how to do it. I'd love to be able to say, oh, well, you must make sure when you walk through the door, you leave it. Well, we don't do that. I can't, and we're talking about it. So I think we enjoy to a level talking about it together. So yeah, I have not got a good answer for you, Hayden. It's a really difficult one.
Are you both quite balanced in terms of how much you want to talk about? Because just one thing I'm thinking, like with my girlfriend, if we were to go in on, if we were to start a business together, I can be very committed, very obsessive, and I just want to. So, like, one of my obsessions is Tesla and Elon Musk. So I will bore the life out of my girlfriend talking about Tesla and Elon Musk to the point that she's like, right, we are now going to stop that, and we're going to do something else for the day, and just don't or I mention it, and I just get this look, and I'm like, I'm going to stop talking. I should stop talking, shouldn't I?
There you go.
I suppose it's just being able to read your partner and read the situation and be like, okay, I'll shut up now and I'll stop going on about wildflower turf, and we can sit down and have our romantic anniversary dinner.
Well, that's exactly the sort of conversation we'll have. And, it's exactly like that. So you reach a point where you just think, actually, we've covered that bit. We've had enough of that. And let's stop on that front. So I think exactly like you said it, you just get to know each other, don't you? And so there comes a point. I think there are probably techniques you can think about to try and make sure that happens. And you do, try and do your best to make it a relationship that isn't too painful for whatever reason, whatever it is, but with the business. So there are probably techniques out there to try it, like, leave it at the door, or leave it in the office, or make sure, I don't know, we actually work together in the office, and I'm sure there's probably plenty of people that say that's a bad move. You can just find out your techniques, and it's just developing it. But I think you've got to make sure, in fact, I'm not even going to go there. I don't really know. I'm very lucky. I haven't really thought long and hard about that.
Maybe don't then, just leave it how it is. It's all good. One thing I want to come on, and we've got to cover, is the lab. This is just like mind blowing, and this is something that it was like with my company. I've always had huge dreams, huge visions. Like you're talking about, one thing you discovered is being in business compared to farming. You have to think those 1 to 5 years ahead. And I always have had this thing where I will think 20 years, 30 years, 50 years ahead and be like, this is my legacy. This is how it's going to impact the globe. And I've always tried to like hone it down a bit. But seeing your lab, that was something where I could see that dream that I had in my head with what I wanted to do with my business. It felt as though someone else had this crazy dream, built this business, and then got to a point where it was scaled to the point that they could make these investments into other things. So to give context, the lab, you can explain better than me. So your lab is like, you've got a designated area and a scientist working on the farm to research into, if you want to take over now, because this is where I'm not going to be able to explain as well as you.
First of all, you said 20 years, and yeah, I'm of an age where 5 years is probably, but you're absolutely right, 20 years is part of it. And I wish I'd had that sort of thinking when I started. So 20 years is a good thing. I would definitely recommend, and really, I'm a bit facetious with the 5 years. It's definitely a longer thing than that. But the further forward you can get, and the further that you can think, like you've said, that you're really thinking long term, and you're basing everything you're doing on that outcome that you've decided, thought about, and you're putting your sort of everything you do in the business strategically and tactically, and everything goes towards that outcome, and it will change, of course, as you go there. And this is common, common business speak, but it is, I found that hard to do. Going on to the lab, yes, you've kindly put it like that. And I suppose you've thought of it as about a sort of long-term thing, and it definitely is. From my point of view, we invested in it simply because when we started this business, and I've said, we've been lucky with it, we came up with ways that were relatively low-hanging fruit. That first 1 square metre looked so great. That mix worked. There we go. We're going to go with that, and it's predominant. We're still doing that mix as our sort of UK native mix. So that was the R&D that went into that. Was basically me trying this 1 metre, chucking it out in the yard, and it working. And we had other things that work, low-hanging fruit. The Olympics gave us some ideas that we're doing, like a species-rich lawn. That's an interesting one. That came direct from the Olympics. It was sort of done for us. But as we've grown bigger and as we've needed to look at other opportunities, the lab has become part of this R&D push to take some of the things that are out there that we are pretty confident will work, but they're not going to be easy. They're not going to be low-hanging fruit, and develop them. So that's one of the aspects of the lab. It's really born from the need for R&D. And if you look at any business, any business really does need to be looking at the ways of developing products. If you're a single product business, you have a lifetime in there for all sorts of reasons. So having new products is very much part of our whole plan. There's 2 or 3 things, and product development is one of them. So that's really what it's been born of. What they're doing in there now, as we've developed the business, so we're growing. We've got some wildflower seed stuff that we're looking at now, because apart from anything, we need good quality seed in the turf. So they're doing things like germination testing and purity testing for the seed. They're doing soil testing, and that's all wrapped up within the whole R&D thing. So the lab is simply there to as a tool, like a tractor in a way, to get us where we need to be going. You've made it sound very grand, and it is a fantastic facility, and it did cost quite a lot to set up. Yeah, it's just been part of that organic growth and born of necessity.
I think you're downplaying it a lot there, and for anyone listening that would not have seen it, don't downplay it. It is incredible. Like, it was baffling to just think, like, this is a wildflower turf company, and they've got a lab. You walk in, like, it's like the size of a normal kitchen, I guess, like your kind of household kitchen. But you have someone employed in your team that's the researcher that does all this testing. You've got the cool fridges and stuff with all the little petri dishes. Like, it is pretty cool.
No, well, it's kind of you to say, and actually, you're absolutely right. And we've just taken on another. Well, we've had a part-time person in there, and they're staying. We're taking on another person for the lab now. Yes, and it isn't going to be big enough soon enough. So kitchen size is probably not going to be big enough. But as part of the business, we want to be seen as authoritative. And it's interesting with wildflowers, because there's an awful lot of myth and mystery and muck and mystery out there with wildflowers. And there's so much riding on them now for all the reasons we haven't discussed, like biodiversity net gain, carbon, sustainable drainage systems, as well as gardens and mindfulness, and there's some big issues out there that wildflowers can address. And so there's a huge amount of interest and demand for it, but there really isn't a great deal of resources in delivering it. And that's either through just the supply of seed or this reliable system. So in order to know what we're talking about, and so that it isn't just the low-hanging fruit that we've come across by chance, we need to know more. And so, yes, actually, you're absolutely right, and it's kind of you to bring me up on it, because I know if my sales guys are watching this, they'll be furious with me downplaying anything. But you're absolutely right. As part of the brand Wildflower Turf Limited, we want to be authoritative, and you can't do that without a broad knowledge of everything wildflowers, and pulling people in with their own expertise, but generating our own expertise as well, because we very much see it. I'd like to think there is one farming legacy within this, and that for this to work, it's got to be practical and accessible for people. And the sort of mystery that's been associated with either mystery or this sort of romantic idyll of taking a scythe out to an area and suddenly having, wildflowers. I mean, without naming names, if you look at a lot of television gardening programs, wildflowers are the thing. And it's either you take this pack of wildflower seeds, scatter it in the soil, and come back a year and it's going to be amazing. Or you take this yellow rattle, it's parasitic on grass, chuck it into your patch there, and in a year you'll have a wildflower meadow. It's absolute rubbish. And funny enough, you never go and see that wildflower meadow in a year because it's never looking good enough to go back to that patch they've just scattered the seed in. That's not to say I'm anti those things, because they are putting a message out that is great. People need to think about this and buy into it. I'd like to think that we just do it in a very much more measured, scientific, knowledge-based and authoritative way, and the R&D is a big chunk. So thank you. You're a good interviewer, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
All the good bits.
Oh, amazing. Oh, thanks. That's made my day now. Well, you're 20 years into your journey now, and obviously you've talked about always having that forward thinking. So what kind of, let's hear some ideas, plans you've got that I'm going to hold you accountable to, and hopefully in 5, 10, 20 years time can remember this interview and go, oh, I wonder if he has achieved it. So what plans have you got for Wildflower Turf?
Well, the big picture one, which follows on from what we said, is I would love to see wildflowers recognised for the value that they can bring to many habitats. You look at the sort of messages we're being fed in terms of wildlife and the environment, and the message is consistent. We're destroying it. We've got cataclysmic events coming our way if we don't redress the issue. And they're very hard to understand, those massive issues. I mean, I found a fantastic cartoon a while ago, and it had a city here, and then here was a wave, which was COVID, and here was a bigger wave, which was recession. Here was a bigger wave, which was climate change, and here was this massive overriding wave, which was biodiversity loss. And the thing about these ones at this end, they're very hard to really be able to sort of really relate to. But the fact of the matter is that if we have lost massive amounts of biodiversity, it is only a matter of time before, life ends. Technology can't do everything. It can do lots, or at least life as we know it ends anyway. So I would never be talking like this in my early farming days, but I can see these things because they do kind of make a lot of sense. And so there are immediate things to address, but you can't forget those big things. And so to go back to your question, in our country, we're not suddenly going to be able to save elephants because there aren't any, but you can save the little insects and the bees and things. And wildflowers can do that quite easily. They really are species rich, so they immediately give you biodiversity. And with biodiversity comes the follow-on of wildlife. Without species diversity in the first place, you're not going to find the wildlife that we do have in this country. And so I think to date, wildflowers have been seriously underestimated. They're just seen as a colourful thing that looks nice and you can wander through and throw a scythe out if you're feeling kind of, romantic about the whole thing, romantic about the 1940s or whatever. But it is far, far more than that. They're a genuine tool for improvement in habitats and wildlife. That is very, very quick. If they're done properly, they're very reliable. They do take a little bit of mindset shift. They do have seasons. They're not colourful 12 months of the year. They're not bling. The UK native wildflowers are fairly subtle, but they're lovely for that. It's recognising the subtlety in their rarity that makes them so exquisite. So yeah, to answer your question in a simple way, I would love to be able to get that message through to the people that will make a difference. And there are plenty of people who will hear that and think that's great, and we're working towards that. But it is a question of doing that in a time scale that means you're delivering things quickly, because we haven't got a lot of time for all of these things. And the quicker we can start to turn things around, the better. So that might be, the TV presenters or the gardeners, but also I can't help but think that without some joined up thinking in policy, these things aren't really going to come to fruition, or not quickly enough anyway. And there's sort of, there are many ways. Biodiversity net gain is a real opportunity for this, and it is out there, and there's some good ideas behind it. And it's going to be, if it's followed through properly, mandated and a commitment and audited, and all of those things are things that we have to do to avoid that big wave, because if we don't, that's going to come and bite us. And they're not going to be that easy. Some of these things are going to be a little bit painful. To my mind, it's not that painful with wildflowers. If you've got to put up with a bit of scruffiness from time to time, that's a very, very minor thing. But the policy guys need to recognise its importance. And so biodiversity net gain would be one thing within that. A simple one that I think can be thought of in a sort of a little bit of a kind of easily summed up thing is green roofs. And, it seems to me we're building more and more, and that's inevitable because there are people out there that need houses and things. But think about green roofs in a way of providing some of that biodiversity. And this, again, is not going to suit the ecologist. He or she won't like this, because they will be thinking, yes, but it's not ancient woodland, and it's not, truly native to that local, flora and fauna. But I just think it's still going to be beneficial, and it's going to be better than concrete or tiles. So make green roofs a much more fixing in policy, and that doesn't have to cost a huge amount either. There can be some serious tax breaks and things like that offered, and these are things that are done elsewhere. It's not just me saying this. This is already done in Europe and quite a lot of places. So it's quite a nice almost metaphor for how I could see things developing in the future for this habitat. And there's so many places that it will work. And, from roundabouts and verges and parks and gardens through to agricultural land. And similarly, if that was subsidized a bit, the cost of doing that and paying farmers to put in chunks of, because ultimately, farmers are big scale, so you can achieve a lot with farmland. To pay them to do that, and to pay them properly, is peanuts compared to all the things that we have, coming down our way. So, sorry, it was again a long-winded answer, but you're getting my the world according to me a little bit. But I think hopefully it makes sense.
You made a lot of valid points there, and especially like just thinking, even from a local council perspective, in having grass verges as wild meadows, wildflowers instead of grasslands. Then you haven't got to mow it multiple times. Well, what council lands? Some of it's done like 12 times a year, some it's done 21 times a year. So to replace that with wildflower, you've instantly cut massive costs there. But I like the way I asked the question for your business, what it looks like in the next 20 years, and your fixation was the impact on the country as a whole and our own thoughts and philosophies. And that's really wonderful. And it kind of gives an impression into your own mind, or a little insight into your own mind there, that it seems like your business is this vehicle for you to try and make an impact and really have an impact on the way that the world is, the way that the country is, the way that our environment is, and hopefully will be in the future in a better manner. And for you, that's the focus, that's the drive, rather than saying, right, we're turning over X million, I want to turn over 10x that.
Well, I am a farmer, Hayden, and it's kind of you to say that, but I would definitely be remiss if I were to accept your sort of plaudits for that, because and I do think this is important anyway, but as a business, we have to make money. We have a lot of people rely on us making money for their wages, but also I think we have to make money to be able to do that R&D and to hopefully promote that bigger picture thing. So I do look at those numbers, and I'm very, very conscious of them, and so it also is very important, and that's the bit that is also, of course, stressful, because we've been lucky that things have been going well, but you get something like the Ukraine situation and the sort of potential for the recession or big recessions and things like that. Yeah, and I'm on tenterhooks for things like that because they're totally out of our control. And you have to look at that. So the business is still very, very, it's just the nuts and bolts of the finances is still very important. So I don't, don't think I'm a.
No, of course, every business
Same.
every business needs to grow and every business needs money. But I like the fact that you could have made it all about. Well, you could have made it all about you as well. You could have said, "I want to achieve this. I want a bigger house," but instead, or "I want X amount of employees," for your own vanity as such. Which some people have that, and it can be good, it can be bad. But just the fact that your answer was purely just on the economy or ecology and the environment and the sort of a community aspect to it. That's really wonderful. And
yes,
one thing that I always have to end with, one final question that I'm going to ask you, James, is what is one thing that exists within the world today that you hope one day will be eradicated?
Oh, Hayden, I think, see, my mind is quite slow. The other day I did this and I was given this question, this tricky one in advance, so I could think through the thing. So think through the interview or the podcast to come up with something. One thing that could be eradicated. Trouble is, I do take these questions seriously, and I suppose I don't want to say something that's trite or I'm going to regret at the end of it. I would like to see, okay, I'll tell you what, it's not going to impress you, but I think this is me with my farming head on. I would like to see a better appreciation of where some of the real fundamentals in life are coming from. And I suppose, the real fundamentals are water and food. And that all definitely ties in with the environment because that is absolutely obviously linked, and everything I've said about wildflowers is still going to be linked and important within farming. But I do think that there is a great deal of sort of short-term thinking when it comes to where we are in our comfortable lifestyles, and that's not to say I want to give up having a television to watch or a hot shower and all of those things. I'm definitely not a sort of hair shirt person, but at the same time, what I found in agriculture, and it's been quite interesting because as our business has grown, I've realized how sort of underappreciated our food producing side is, which is still the rest of the farm, and how undervalued it is. So is that an answer? I think people talk about waste and food waste. I went to an interview with an MP, well, not an interview, just a farming group, went and met him, and he said, above all else, price of food has got to remain very, very low. And I'm just thinking, but I came away thinking it's sort of fair enough, but thought more about it and said, actually, is that conducive to getting to where we need to be? Because food is going to be finite, and we're seeing that. The Ukraine situation is going to have a big impact on farming produce. So yeah, again, I'm waffling, but I think it's an all right answer. It's a little bit closer to home. It's not a huge picture, but I think in a way it is. It'd be nice to think that people can really start to appreciate, and I can't exactly remember your question, but I think that ties in with what would you like to eradicate? Well, it's wasteful thinking, but that makes it sound too simple. It's more about a better appreciation of where things come from and the sort of supply chain that goes into getting us to a place where we're sort of living comfortably. And to be honest, when you look at what's going on in this other places around the world, and you just think what they're now suffering, it shouldn't be that hard to be able to really start to appreciate what we've got.
No, I still like that answer. I like the fact I ask the question and I always get such varied answers, and some people go very broad, something that's relevant to all of us, and you focus there on something much more within your own industry, but then has an impact on all of our lives. The eradication of, as you said, short-term thinking, I guess a lot of misinformation there, to then have the manifestation of an awareness and appreciation for what stuff we all take for granted every day. Just being able to go to the local supermarket, or even not even that, just click a button on our phone and suddenly groceries arrive, all these things arrive without a care in the world for how they got there. So to have that appreciation for something, and that's, yeah, I think that's something in a different industry I'm in my own workings. It's just when it comes to pricings and about being able to price something so people hold value and hold appreciation in it. I think food is so vital, and it's something that it shouldn't be expensive. It should be accessible for everybody to get the nutrients that they need. But then it can, I think, if you make the price really low, or if it is too low, people don't have that appreciation for it, because you can just, it cost me 10p, I can get rid of that, doesn't matter. Whereas you want people to really value it. So that's a good answer, and hopefully people will listen to it and appreciate food, or all other great.
Well, I could have said mosquitoes, but that would have been easy. I don't like mosquitoes much.
No, it's great. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully one day this can be an in-person conversation, although the rules have lapsed, but I'm limited to how far I can travel at the moment with this podcast. So hopefully in the future we can do a face-to-face interview.
Yeah, sure. No, it's been good. Thanks very much for having me.
So there we have it. There's the conversation with James. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did sitting down with him. I really wish I could have had that. That would have been, I said about at the start, having the conversation with Keith that's coming up next week out on a field. It would have been amazing to actually go back to the Wildflower headquarters and have sat somewhere on a farm and had that conversation. But maybe I'll do that again in the future sometime, and then we can actually sit in a little patch of wildflowers and record episodes. That would be really cool to watch on YouTube, wouldn't it? Us sitting in like a little array of wildflowers in the summer, and a nice sunny day just like outside.